Hello, this is Del Chatterson in Montreal. I'm a crime writer representative for Quebec and the Atlantic provinces. And today we're speaking with Catherine McKenzie, also from Montreal, a Montreal writer. And we'll start with introductions, and then we'll have to have a chat with Catherine about her latest book, which is called 6 Weeks to Live. And she has a copy too.
I have a copy too. But I have my background blurred out, and I have to find the little window that I can put the book in.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, thank you for having me. My name is Catherine McKenzie. I am a native Montrealer, and 6 Weeks to Live is my 11th novel.
Very good. And your background is a lawyer.
Yeah, I practiced. Yeah, I practiced law for 20
years. You were a
years.
lawyer before you?
I was. Yeah. I you know, it's funny. I didn't quit my job to become a lawyer, which is kind of how the narrative goes. But I was doing both for 10 years, and after practicing law for 23 years, in half my life in the same place, I did decide to step away last summer. So now I only have one job.
Oh, I see. Okay. So you were doing both. You had a day job as well as writing. And how long ago did you write your first novel?
My first novel was published at the beginning of 2010. So I was 10 years doing both at the same time.
10 years, 10 novels. That's pretty good production rate.
Yeah, I mean, I had 3 completed, or actually almost 4 completed novels when I got my book deal. And I luckily was able to slot those in. So I'm not to discount what I did, but it wasn't quite as impressive as it sounds.
Yeah, I get that the same question. People ask me, how long did it take you to write that first novel? And well, the first one took 15 years. The next, then I did 2 more in 18 months. So it's kind of they rattle around in your head for a long time, and many different drafts before it finally pops out as a finished novel. It's an interesting process. Had you written anything else prior to that?
I mean, I'd written poetry. But
and business writing, did your business?
Yeah, I mean, lots of writing as a lawyer, obviously, but no, never took a writing class. Oh, really? other than reading, which is obviously a writing class in its own.
Yeah, that's the best way. And so you haven't studied or followed any particular writer to learn how to write better?
No, I mean, yeah, certainly since I've started writing, I've done, I've taken seminars, and I've given seminars, and I've read a couple of craft books, and, I've definitely gone back and read certain books from a craft perspective. And when I first started writing, whatever it was, I didn't even know if it was a novel. I did have to look at what is this supposed to look like? Mechanically, when you read a book, but how long is a chapter, and how many words are in it, and chapter, what's the proper formatting, all that stuff that I could find on the internet. So
okay. you should follow the YouTube videos.
It was kind of before YouTube videos, honestly. But okay.
And how did you get started? What motivated you to start writing at all?
I just had an idea that wouldn't leave me alone, and I kind of didn't know what it was, and I was like, should I make a film? I didn't know. And so I started writing it down, and probably when I had 40 or 50 pages of, again, whatever it was, I met an actress who was moving to Montreal, and she was writing her first novel, and we started trading chapters, and I decided to see if I could actually write a novel. I didn't think I had the imagination or the creativity to do that. So turned out I did.
Well, that's it. It's the writing ability. It's a very, at least the one I've just read is very accomplished. Has it come a long way in your mind, your writing skills or capabilities?
Yeah, I mean, yes, but when I recently went back and reread a large section of my first published novel, and I'm like, oh, this is good. I did a good job, and because I wrote it in 2007, and it's 15 years later almost that I was reading it, I could be objective about it. I could almost read it like someone who hadn't written it. So, I mean, I really was a lifelong voracious reader, which I think helps. And I was a litigator, and a lot of litigation is done through writing, and that helped as well. But yeah, I mean, of course, I think my books are more complex, and I do try and push myself from book to book. But there is something to be said about a simple story as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Tell me more about how the legal writing helped your writing in fiction. Was it a difficult transition, or were you aware of having
No,
to do things differently?
I mean, obviously, when you're writing legal papers, you're constrained by a set of facts,
You can't.
you're right. You can't make stuff up. That's important.
Yeah.
But no, I mean, I think it really is, law is storytelling. Litigation is storytelling. You start with a proceeding
Yeah.
that is just the facts in the case, and it is telling a story. That's what oral argument as well. You have to motivate the person who's listening to you to decide in your favor. And that's not just the facts in the law, but it's presentation. And so I think, and I do think I was always a storyteller. Like at parties, I have sort of these long set piece stories of various weird trips that I've been on, or weird things that have happened, and I enjoyed telling those. And I think when I look back, that was kind of a precursor to writing. It was, telling a 20-minute story that had a beginning and a middle and an end, and highs and lows and laughs and all that sort of stuff. And so I think I just put all that stuff together and learned as I went along and made mistakes for sure.
I think that's it. You started as a storyteller, and you had a
Right.
story you just wanted to get out.
Yeah, no, exactly.
And what
Good
was
way
the
of putting
nature
it.
of that first story that got you started?
Oh, well, it lives in a drawer for a reason, but like many first novels, sort of semi-autobiographical
What was the
stuff.
title?
And
The first one was called what?
it's not published, my first novel.
Oh, it never was.
No. It's like my practice novel. It lives in a drawer. So I guess that's actually number 12 or 13 or whatever the hell it is. But when I was writing that, I was happy to put it aside at the end. A lot of people really cling to that first book, and
Yeah, well, that's a common mistake. A lot of
a big
writers
mistake.
who are in a hurry, and those of us that are impatient and can go
Which
to
I totally get.
self-publishing route.
I get you spend all that time on something, but you know what? I was glad to get myself out of the way, and stop writing about myself, because I don't want to write memoir, and I wanted to actually write fiction, and so I just kind of need to get myself out of the way and let other stories come
Something
through.
completely
So,
imaginary or
yeah,
inspired by
something
something
literally had zero to do. I mean, the book that I wrote after that book is my book Arranged, which is about a woman who uses an arranged marriage service. So not, and I think you mentioned before we started this call that I went to your sister's book club, and that was with my book Spin, which is about a journalist who follows a celebrity into rehab. I have not been a journalist or been to rehab. So, it's, though many people assumed that I had when I was on tour for that book. So.
Well, it's funny, is that a lot of journalists become novelists. That training years later comes from journalism.
Of course. And lots of lawyers also. So.
Well, yeah, and I was a management consultant, so I did lots of writing as a management consultant with reports, and I continued as a advisor to entrepreneurs. I ended up writing a lot of blog posts and newsletters and put my advice down. And it's the kind, you do have to go through a process of understanding what you're trying to communicate. But a lot of it, even in my nonfiction, I've got a lot of real life stories, as I call them. And so I just took some of those stories and blew them up into a full novel, added a whole lot of crime and corruption and drama. That's the fiction part. And do any of your stories come from legal experience? Were you involved in a civil case or a criminal case?
No, I don't write about cases I was involved in. I don't think that's fair to my clients, and there's confidentiality issues and things like that. So that being said, I mean, I have books that are like my book Fractured is inspired by two legal stories that I read, not that I was involved in, but just that book is about two neighbors who get involved in things that spiral out of control in a neighborhood, and the inspiration for that was reading a judgment about this insane fight between two neighbors in Toronto, and the judge was just disgusted with these people, and he just excoriated them. So sometimes that happens in judgments, and those judgments circulate in the legal community because they're kind of hilarious when they're not about your clients. And very soon afterwards, I read a newspaper article about someone who was arrested in Toronto for manslaughter because they had hit someone with their car, and initially claimed it was an accident, but then they'd investigated and it turned out they were fighting over the recycling bins or something. And so I was like, oh, these two stories, just fused together in my mind. And I was like, oh my God, how do you end up almost running over your neighbor with a car? Like, what has gone wrong in that neighborhood that happens? And those two things fused, and out came Fractured. So I've definitely been inspired sometimes by legal events. I do my book, The Murder Game, which is sort of like a book within a book. But anyway,
Okay.
is set at McGill Law School when I was there. And so, it's not like my legal career has had no presence in my books, and there are lawyers, but I don't know about you, but I found that, when you're writing about something you know too much about, it can be hard to put the right amount of detail about it in a book. And
Yeah.
often things that are actually factually true don't seem real in books, particularly with the
That's an
law. People,
interest. Yeah, it's interesting
right?
you say that. I just had that conversation yesterday. I've had a short story that I graduated as a mining engineer from UBC originally, and I worked underground in the mines of British Columbia. And I've always had the idea in my head, a bit like you had, that it was a great place to murder somebody because you could make it look like an accident.
That's a
Underground,
great
there's so
place.
many accidents. And so
Definitely.
I wrote this short story, and we got that discussion that I'm sort of torn between making it using the jargon that miners and people from the industry understand, but so it makes it understandable and relatable for them, and they'll check technically that you've got it right.
Right.
But for other readers, they don't understand what you're talking about. So that's
Yeah.
always the dilemma.
It's a delicate balance. And I think also with the law, a lot of people think they know because of TV,
Yeah, they watch
and
TV.
they're wrong. And so when you do it right, often you'll get comments of like, "Are you sure?" And it's like, yeah, I am sure, but I understand, like, I put too much detail here, or you need to kind of, the way I look at it, any profession that you're talking about, is that you need to have just enough detail to cross that like reality threshold, so people will follow you into the world that you want to take them in, and then it can all fall away. You don't, we don't write books about the minutia of any job. That's boring.
Yeah.
So,
Well, that's it. And I have the same challenge because I include technology. I wrote most of my first three, well, all of my first three novels are set in the 1980s. So I'm talking, for me,
oh,
it's fascinating. And for some readers, it's interesting to learn about the old
right.
days when
Like
computers.
Sue Grafton. Sue Grafton had that problem, right?
Yeah. And some people say, like there are some very popular TV shows about the 1980s and the computer business, the story
Right.
of Steve Jobs. So people
Sure,
can
sure.
relate to that, but only people my age or thereabout. And for young people, it sounds like ancient history. It's like trying to explain that.
Right. Well, I just think it's like it's weird with sort of near history like that, is
Yeah.
you just have to really remind people this is not now.
Yeah.
Whereas if they were reading real historical fiction, there wouldn't be that issue. No, would be like, where's their cell phone in the 1800s? But
Yeah. Well, and then the other thing that you have to balance, I find, and you'll probably find the same, is that what you describe has to be plausible. Like
right.
the murder that you describe in this book, or could that really happen? Is that so? You have to make sure that the
Yes.
technical experts agree. Yes, that's
Yes.
that's
And
the right
yes. And
caliber for the gun.
I did do that research. I did
Yeah.
that research. I did. Yeah.
Yeah, and so you do need some technical expertise to check that you haven't but for the reader, it just has to be plausible. It sounds
Yeah.
reasonable. I don't know
Yeah.
if
Well,
that's true.
Google is your friend, right? Like,
Yeah. Well, yeah, it's so easy now with Wikipedia and Google. If
I
you
think
want
it's interesting. I don't know if you get this a lot, but I get a lot of like, "Oh, you must do so much research for your books." And I'm like, I really don't.
it's not nice to.
I mean, maybe I should, but I don't. So,
Yeah, well, there's a Somalian refugee in my book, and I have a long chapter on him returning to Mogadishu in 19. The trouble is, you can go to YouTube and you can go down the streets, so you can describe a street scene
yep.
as if you were
Yep.
there. And
Yeah.
people think, wow, I
That's
didn't know
good.
you.
Yeah.
It feels like cheating. But
You know what? This whole idea that you have to have experienced something to write about it, I completely reject that idea, particularly in like time and space. I'm not saying that, the Own Voices movement doesn't have a legitimate point of view. Of course they do. But I don't think, you don't have to be a welder to write a book about a welder,
yeah.
and it's a weird connection that happens, I think, probably more to women, and certainly in certain genres where people just assume that you have to be writing about yourself. And I'm like, but
Yeah, that's it.
I get that question a lot, and I sort of have a standard answer now. Is I'm like, well, my life would have been really interesting if I done all the
Yeah, and
that all the people in my books have done, but it's not that interesting, So
yeah, Yeah, you don't want to explain your legal theory or how
Oh,
you,
you
how you won
froze.
the case because of some complicated theories.
Okay.
Okay, sorry about the technical glitch. Zoom doesn't work 100% of the time for any of us apparently. And
Shocking.
yeah, well, we were talking about working from our work experience or
Hold
our
on.
day jobs, what we've learned otherwise. And I was going to ask you, you did mention that you're born and raised in Montreal, you worked in
Yes.
Montreal, but this last book is written about located in Surrey, BC. How did that happen?
Well, most of my books are not set in Montreal,
Well, they're
actually.
not, huh?
I find Montreal a tricky place to write about with the
Yeah.
whole English French thing. And again, talking about reality, you and I know that you could spend your entire life in English in Montreal, in certain neighborhoods, but that doesn't necessarily ring true to people who aren't from here. So I've often avoided writing about Montreal, or I have a book set in the townships at a summer camp.
Yeah.
That uh, avoids the issue. But I do like setting books in a place that I've been, if I can, to sort of ground it in time and space. So you, of course, can, as you said, look at places through YouTube. And my grandparents lived there, and I spent quite a bit of time there, particularly just sort of right before I came up with the idea for this book. When my grandmother passed away at 103.5.
Oh,
And I was there dealing with her estate. So, and it's a very evocative place. There's big, huge old trees, and the weather is a force. And I don't know, people have set books in Surrey, BC before. So I was like, I'm going to do
yeah.
that.
Yeah, it is, and Montreal is a challenge. You're right, and I mean, I used the example of Louise Penny, who was probably our most famous Quebec
Right.
writer, and Kathy Reichs gave me some good ideas. She was writing sort of business fiction in Montreal, and you do have
Right.
to kind of refer to the landmarks and include a little
Yeah.
bit of bilingual. But the
But,
biggest complaint I got from an
Kathy
American,
writes, sorry, go ahead. Go
I was
ahead.
just going to say that as long as you have bonjour, hi, or whatever you do
Right.
to translate what you
Right.
said in French.
Right.
But I found the biggest complaint from an American reader, he couldn't keep track of the names because the French Canadian names weren't as, Bruce Smith was much easier to remember than Jean Lapage.
I'd say. Well,
So
but I think, I mean, those are two good examples. So Louise, her books are mostly set in Three Pines, right? And
yeah,
so she's taken this very English community outside of Montreal to sort of sidestep that issue, whether that's why she deliberately did that from the beginning, I'm not sure. And then, and Kathy's books, which I really like, the one thing I don't think is actually realistic for a native Montrealer is that she calls the street names the French names, which an English Montrealer would never do.
yeah,
Like, I don't think of it as Rue Sherbrooke. I think of it as Sherbrooke, and that is how
yeah,
English people think about street names. And so that's always my one quibble with her books, was that if it was written by somebody who was English from Montreal, that's not how the street names would
yeah,
be.
yeah. Well,
So
and local
yeah,
people will pick up on that. Yeah, yeah. I've had people
yeah,
tell me the same
for
thing.
sure.
It's not Montreal, it's Mount Royal. Oh,
Right.
sorry, depending on who you are. Yeah,
And it's Montreal, no accent. I mean, like, I
yeah.
don't put the accent on Montreal. Like, if
No,
in
right.
French it's Terre-Neuve, Montreal has no accent to me in English.
It
So,
sort of adds unnecessary complications to
that
the
too.
challenge of writing the story.
Yes.
Uh, but yeah, do you have many different locations in your novels, or are you
Yeah, I mean, my first
mostly
novels were
North
set
America?
nowhere. Yeah, all in North America. But my first novels was just set in a city that wasn't named, a North American city that could be anywhere kind of on the East Coast. It could be Montreal, it could have been Boston, whatever. And then I've a couple times made fictional towns that are based on real places.
Okay,
Um, and then I've set a book in Chicago. I've set a book in Cincinnati, New York. So kind of all over.
okay. Yeah, you mentioned my daughter actually, who had the book club
Oh,
in
your daughter, yeah,
that
sorry.
you visited, and she enjoyed this book, but she said she found that compared to others that you've kind of transitioned to what she called more crimey, more of crime fiction. How would you describe your own? Is there a transition in your mind in terms of
Sure.
style or genre?
I mean, right now I think I'm writing domestic suspense, thriller, domestic noir,
Suspense
whatever you want to
thriller,
call
yeah.
it. Suspense thriller, yeah. And I start off writing romantic comedies.
Romantic comedy, okay.
Yeah, yeah. So I've evolved.
You don't have a series of the same characters from one to another?
No, I mean, my first book, Spin, has a sequel named Spun, that follows a side character from
Okay.
that book, in a novella. But nope, every book is a standalone. You know, for me, I know I'm done with the book because I don't have any questions left about the characters in the book.
Okay.
So, while it might have been smarter for my career to come up with a set of characters.
Well, yeah, serials are maybe, yeah, keep a more loyal audience. I don't know, but I sort of did that because I was determined to tell. I started with the concept of 5 ideas and 5 titles in my head, and then I filled in the blanks.
Oh, okay.
The 5th one I haven't done
Perfect.
yet, but I have a title and a theme, and I.
Chop chop.
Sorry?
Chop chop.
Yeah, that's what people tell me. I just finished the 4th one, so I'm moving on to the 5th now. But when I was reading yours, I was thinking it reminded me of a couple of writers. Robert Crace, I don't know if you know him, because
No, I don't.
the challenge that I saw him do so well, and you've done equally well, if not better, is the changes from first person to third person and different points of views of different characters. In your book,
Right.
you've got the primary character, a mother and her 3 daughters and the husband. And that's hard to do, and you did it very well. So I congratulate you on that. And the other thing that I kind of in my mind described, it's like Stephen King says, what you do is you take an ordinary person, put them in a difficult situation, and let them figure out how to get out of it. In your case, it's the familiar family drama of death, divorce, relationships, and then you throw in twists and surprises as to the relationship that you thought you understood becomes different, and what people remember of their past. So for me, it's a bit very much like Harlan Coben. I don't know if you
just sorry, one sec. I can't. It's David. It's loofah. It's a loofah.
Okay, we're back, and the question I was going to ask Catherine was whether you know Harlan Coben or you're familiar with his, because his books also are very much sort of family drama that turns into a murder mystery, a horror story. It's suddenly much more dramatic and complicated and suspenseful than you might think.
You know, I know who Harlan Coben is. I actually haven't read any Harlan Coben books, but I've watched 3. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. And is that something that you built in? Is that kind of the theme? Is it a continuing theme? You said you started with a romantic comedy. This last one is not very romantic.
I don't think so. No, it's the anti-romance, I think. But no, I mean, I don't think I've actually written a domestic drama like this before. Okay. So, I mean, there's definitely other books that deal with family issues but no, I mean, I don't think it's a through line in my books. I think the through line is more what you were saying before about somebody, you know, how ordinary people end up in these extraordinary circumstances and how they react under pressure. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's right. Yeah, that is a good standard theme. And are you transitioning to something new, or what's coming next in your series novels 11, 12, 13?
No, I turned in next year's book. It's called Please Join Us, and it's about a woman who joins a women's networking group that turns sinister. So it's another suspense thriller, but this time set in a workplace. I'm actually main character's a lawyer, so there you go. Now that I'm not practicing anymore.
Well, you've got rave reviews and sold lots of the other books. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
We'll look forward to reading the next ones. And people can find your books everywhere, and they can learn more about you. You're on Facebook, Instagram. Anything else you'd like to tell us that we haven't learned about Catherine or your books?
No, that's it. Thank you.
Something that nobody knows that you'd like us.
Oh, I don't want to tell anybody something nobody knows. What? No.
All right. Well, thanks very much. A pleasure to get to know you better and learn about your books and your process. Thanks very much, Catherine. We'll hope to see you again at another Crime Writers of Canada event. Bye for now.
Thanks so much for having me.
My pleasure. Bye-bye.